Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. I feel like I've been doing so many of this that I'm losing time track of what is going on. But I'm so excited to have you all over here. If you find us via ADP list, LinkedIn, YouTube, if you're one of the cherries or participants there, we're part of the job readiness. So happy to have you here. Today, all this week is going to be of how to present your work. Yesterday, we had Aisha. She was talking about how to show your work as a developer. You can always find them in our YouTube channel so you get to know more. We've been doing, or we are going to be doing, a 6-week initiative. Every week, I'm going to bring in a lot of guest speakers. This week, we have 3. So this has been really cool. I forgot to mention, my name is Juliet, and I'm one of the co-founders for Cherry on Tech, and love to have you all over here. So this today is going to be about how to present your work as a product manager. So let's bring our guest speaker. Hello. Let's make the face be smaller. How's it going? Nice to have you today.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Yes. And again, I know that I've been mentioning it to everybody, but all the guest speakers that we have so far for the Job Readiness Initiative have been on our mentors for the cohort program on Cherry on Tech. So super cool to have them as a mentor, and now to tell them for these as a guest speaker so they can keep sharing their knowledge with all of you. I forgot. I imagine that you already have who are you in your presentation. So maybe we just start with this. I'm going to leave you, everybody, with Jeanine. Today, we are talking about how to showcase your work as a product manager.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Great. Yeah, we'll dive right into it. So I will start with who I am. My name is Jeanine Longley. I came from a customer support background. That's often one of the questions being a product manager is like, where do you come from? And I wanted to be closer to solving the root issue. I felt like in customer support, we were often just putting Band-Aids on problems. So I tried development and design, and both of them I found I did not have the patience for. I have much respect and regard for those roles. I was actually hired as a project management contractor, and then that transitioned into what was like a product specialist role. And then I advocated for that to become a product manager title. So I know many of you are looking to make a transition, and I just like to talk about my own transition to show that it's not always super straightforward. Sometimes there are stages where you kind of have to take a half step in the right direction or advocate for exactly what it is that you want. And now I've been in product for over 7 years, and I've helped build up product teams. And so hopefully have something helpful to share with you today. We're going to go through a few different topics today. So I am going to talk about the challenges of breaking into product. You probably don't need to know these ones. You probably know them yourselves, but we are going to do a little refresher. We're going to talk about why we showcase our work, how we can showcase our work, and then we'll do a bit of time, of course, at the end for questions. So first things first, what are these challenges that have to do with breaking into product management? I mean, oftentimes what I find is that enterprise companies have associate PM programs that are as competitive as the Olympics, it feels like. Super competitive, challenging to get into. You're just spending hours honing your resume, right? Applying for that. And then mid-sized companies often have PM teams. Maybe if you're in a smaller market, it's like PM teams of 3 to 5. Maybe it's a little bit bigger. But oftentimes, because the team isn't huge, the job requirements list, 4 years of experience as a PM. How do we get the experience? That's the challenge. And then startups, they can often only afford one product hire, so they hire a director, even though the CEO is going to call all the shots anyway and drive that director absolutely crazy. So what's going on? There's a few different things going on in the market here, and we want to keep in mind when we're talking about showcasing our work, which kinds of teams we want to work on, what kind of environment we want to work in, because your approach is going to change a little bit based on where you want to end up. So If we are trying to break into product management and we're coming from a different background, any different background really, we're often perceived as a risky hire. Maybe you're not sure where to start. You're like, how do I get the product experience that seems to be required for every product role? But you have lots of transferable skills. You have training for the job. You have passion for the work. It's a tricky spot, right? So we're going to get into why do we showcase our work and our knowledge. Well, for two reasons. One, we want to prove that we are capable of doing the work. We want to create that, de-risk that perception that we're able to do the job. So we have to qualify ourselves. We have to basically prove, hey, even though I don't have a product manager title on my resume, maybe I've done a lot of the things that are required in this role. I have a lot of relevant experience. I am going to be able to do that job. That's a big part of why we are going to showcase our work. But it's not the only part of showcasing your work. And the other part I want to talk about today is also demonstrating your unique value. Now, as a product manager, we spend a lot of time talking about unique value propositions and how do we develop that for our product. But I also want you to think a little bit about yourself almost as kind of a product here. You're trying to basically get a job. You're trying to propose that you are the best solution for them, the best hire for them. And so you also need to showcase that you will bring unique value to the organization that another candidate can't bring. Not only can you do the job, you're qualified, but also you're going to be the best hire option of all the candidate options out there. And this why, I want to break that down a little bit more. So when we're talking about showcasing our work, the qualify side feels, I think, a little bit more straightforward. So we do want to talk about our training. So if you've done training, you want to show that training. If you haven't done training, you might want to consider doing some training. In order to prove that you're qualified, it might be helpful to fill in some gaps in your existing knowledge with training. How do you decide what training is relevant? Well, this is also very similar to how would you decide what features are missing in your product. You would do a landscape assessment. You would kind of look at all the roles on the market. You would see, do a lot of those roles require a certain skill that you feel you really lack? Do a lot of them require familiarity with a tool or a practice that you feel unfamiliar with or less confident in? You can also do informational interviews with product managers in the field. Ask them what training they feel would be the most relevant for someone in your position. And use that data when you spot a theme. One data point is not data. In the same way, again, that if this was your product and you were trying to figure out what features are missing, you would talk with a bunch of your ideal customers, ideal customer profile or your ICP. You would do qualitative and quantitative data analysis of their needs. This is the same thing. Again, think of yourself kind of like the product here. What are the missing features? And so find those ways to get quantitative and qualitative data about what might be missing from your feature set, shall we say. So do and show your relevant training as part of qualifying yourself for the job. Also practice and show your results of your practice. So Cherry on Tech is obviously like a great example of practicing the work itself and being able to show those results. However you choose to show the practice skills that you have, you want to make sure that is becoming very visible. So a lot of times people think about, a portfolio as this kind of static thing that lives somewhere on the internet. Maybe it's in a PDF, maybe it's on a website. And once you're finished, you spend hours polishing it to exactly show off what it is that you did. I want to change your mind about that. I think practicing and showing the results of your practicing the product management skills can be done much more consistently and regularly, and you'll actually, I think, get more value out of doing that regularly. So if you're doing a program like Cherry on Tech, rather than waiting for the very end to have a portfolio piece that you can talk about, if you do a cohort in the future, you could also, as you're going each week, think about, what's something I could write about this week that I have struggled with, I have learned from, I could teach others about because of what I'm doing, and then write a little LinkedIn post. You write a little like, hey, this week with Cherry on Tech, we've been focused on prioritization. This is something where all the books tell you A, B, and C, but once I get into the weeds, what I found was D, and here's my tip, or here's what I learned. So practicing these product management skills is not just for that kind of end result, because it might take a lot of effort to get there. Think about what are all the little things along the way? What are all the little moments that you're practicing your PM skills that you can show that you are qualified to be a product manager? You have those skills, you're practicing them and you're learning them, and you're really good at them. We're getting really good at them. So yeah, I think, here we can let perfection be the enemy of progress. I think it's really helpful to do a lot more sharing, since people seeing one example on their LinkedIn feed, they might not be in the right headspace, they might not be in the right mood, they might not click through if the headline isn't interesting. But if you're consistently talking about these skills that you have as a product manager, because you're practicing to be a product manager, if you're constantly talking about that in a public way, then probably one or two of those will actually capture someone's attention, and they'll be going, oh, interesting, this person has a really, sophisticated take on prioritization, or they really get the struggles of this. They understand how this is done and why it's tricky. So they get it. They know it. Yeah. And then the third part of qualifying yourself is speaking to the relevance of your work history. And then this is another area where you can, of course, take the obvious moments to speak to the relevance of your work history. On a cover letter, in your resume, you want to make sure you are talking about how the skills that you have developed through your whole career are highly relevant to this transition that you want to make into product management. And you want to showcase how those skills have showed up in different ways. But again, I would encourage you not to wait for the big dramatic crossing the finish line moment of a cover letter or a resume. Again, I would encourage people to speak to the relevance of their work history in less formal ways. Again, I'm a big fan of trying to post on LinkedIn, because of course that is the social network for job stuff. But it can also be when you're having networking conversations. Maybe when you're talking with people as you're networking, you're starting to weave in some of this. If you are doing posts about this, it's could be topics such as, what my background in customer service taught me about dedication to what the customer cares about, or, my background in XYZ and how prioritization is a skill there. These aren't great titles, but find the overlap where you have a skill that is a product management skill and something you've used a lot in your existing work and your existing experience, and talk about how that's the same skill, and talk about, and you can even, if you're an expert at it, teach through that, offer some tips and tricks. And yeah, as you're doing this, just start to craft that narrative of yourself as a really qualified potential hire. You're basically putting out into the world over and over again, look, I have the relevant training. I've been practicing these skills. You can see the results of that. The work history that I have is highly relevant. You can see how that directly ties together. That narrative, as I suggested, should probably come through on your LinkedIn profile, on your cover letter, on your resume, in interviews, of course, but also in less formal environments like networking calls. It should be visible whenever you are visible and wanting to be in a space where people perceive you as a qualified candidate for product roles. And yeah, if you're unsure of how your past ties into your future, or how to craft that narrative, I think diving into the different areas of product management and kind of doing a skills assessment of that work and your past roles, and finding that Venn diagram, you'll probably see there's more there than you thought. So that's some of the groundwork on the qualify side. I also, of course, want to talk about the fun part, for me, the fun part, which is showcasing unique value. And so, this is so familiar, right? This is the product challenge. A huge part of product management is to identify, facilitate the building of, and then showcase unique value. So, going backwards, not forwards. If we look at this overview of the product management lifecycle according to Pendo, but I generally agree, it's a pretty good overview. We're talking about discovery, validation, building, launching, evaluating, and iterating. Some version of this, right? And so when we pull that back into showcasing your work and showcasing your skills as a candidate for a PM role, in the discovery phase, you're going to want to gather freely available data about what the market needs. So read a whole bunch of job postings. Just do that as part of your, fun times. Become really knowledgeable about the domain itself. So reading, thought leaders, reading different content around product management, different people who believe product management is done really well when it looks like this, or done really poorly when it looks like that. Just becoming knowledgeable, having the language, the lingo, discovering what people talk about in this realm. What do product managers struggle with? What do they, focus on when they're working in public? And craft a hypothesis of what your unique value proposition will be. And that should be a combination of the skills that you bring. So if you work in a company that's, in healthcare, and you're wanting to work at a health tech company, that's part of your unique value proposition, is you understand that space. You understand healthcare, you know what it's like, and you're going to understand some of the customer pains right away because you've got a history there. And then maybe your training has been on, learning about AI models. So then you're also, okay, my unique value proposition has to do with my background, healthcare, my training, AI, and my passions, whatever those might be. So you're starting to pull together based on your discovery of what you think is going on in the domain and what's going on in the market right now. Here's where I fit, and here's where maybe my unique value sits, where I would be like the exceptional standout candidate. Once we've done some discovery, we're going to validate. We're going to talk to our customers. So our customers in this case is obviously not actually customers, so to speak, but people who might be hiring product managers. And so whether that's someone who's actively hiring right now for a role that you could actually take, which obviously is a little bit different because those conversations are going to be harder to get. We usually call them interviews. Or you're talking to someone who fits, again, maybe your ideal customer profile. If we map this back into product management work, it's the kind of company that you would really like to work at. Maybe they're not hiring right now, but that's okay. They're the kind of company that you would really like to work at. Then you want to talk to people who work there, product managers who work there, or hiring managers who work there. You want to learn from all of your closed, lost opportunities. So if you do, apply somewhere, you get an interview, and they tell you it's not a great fit, as much as possible, of course, you want to ask, hey, any feedback you're able to provide. And the more you're able to ask pointed questions, the more you're able to ask less bias introducing questions, then you're going to get really good data from this validation process. If you say, do I come across as a potential product manager? Do I come across as qualified to be a product manager? It's the same as asking your customers, would you like a new feature? Would you like some candy to a child? Everyone says yes. It's like the right answer. So you want to try to find questions that are a little bit more pointed. So if you're doing informational interviews with product managers at a company that you would love to work at one day, don't ask them, hey, do you think I'm qualified to be a product manager? You might get useful feedback, but a lot of people will want to protect your feelings and will just say, yeah, it seems like you have a really useful background. Instead, ask them a question like, what do you think are my strengths? Looking at my profile and my desire to be in product management, and where do you think is my biggest risk factor? If they're able to expose for you what they perceive as your strengths and what they perceive as your weaknesses, that is goldmine, because it's likely the hiring manager might have a similar perception, especially if you ask a few people and get some similar responses. And then you can address those weaknesses directly through training, through how you position yourself, through various means. And this is the same thing, intentional networking, as talk to your customers, but I want to reiterate it because I think it is so powerful. In the same way that as a product manager, the most important thing you can do is talk to your customers. If you're on the job hunt, I think the most important thing you can do is network. That word has an ick to it. Some people don't like it. I get that, but it's so important. I find on your job hunt, this is the thing that's single-handedly going to get you exposure to more opportunities. How many people do you have on your LinkedIn network? How many jobs do you see the possibility of applying to through that extended network? And how many referrals can you get? So being intentional about who you're meeting, why you're meeting them. And of course, intentional for me also means trying to think through how you can also provide value back to your community. So rather than just extracting value, also trying to see, is there someone you can connect this person to, or, asking them about their life a little bit, and then seeing if there's some ways that you can offer something else if they're supporting you through this one domain. So we've talked about discovering what might be your unique value proposition. Maybe you already had that in mind. Going about the process of trying to validate that. Building. How do we build in this analogy that I've made where you are the product and your career is the product? So I think at the build, you want to develop the messaging that makes sense for your product. And so when you are trying to position yourself in the market as an ideal PM hire, when you're trying to showcase your work ultimately to get hired, you want to make sure the messaging makes sense. And so in order to do that, again, you have to have an understanding of what the market is looking for, an understanding of what's probably your ideal fit. And you do want to narrow that down a little bit. The last time I was looking for a role, I said, I want to work for a climate or social good company. I want it to be 50 to 200 employees. And I want it to be a company that has a regular practice around talking to their customers or getting data, qualitative and quantitative, from their customers. And I posted that publicly on LinkedIn and everywhere in my network. I said, this is what I want, these 3 things. The number of people who reached out with opportunities that met maybe 1, sometimes 2 of those 3 things was great. So many people reached out. Everyone isn't going to see you being specific about where is your best fit as you saying, this is my only possible fit. I promise you, people will see that your best fit is very similar to something that might be a good fit, and they'll refer you to that. You don't have to worry that if I'm really specific about my best fit, people won't think of me for a very good, close by fit. I don't think that's true. They will think of you. In fact, they're more likely to think of you if you have been really memorable in talking about your best fit and they see overlap between that best fit and this good fit opportunity and that maybe they came across. So building that messaging based on your understanding of the market needs and what would be your ideal. And also building here is partly filling in any gaps. If you have done some research and you're finding out, oh, wow, the kind of company I really want to work in, they tend to be pretty strict agile. Maybe it makes sense to go get my product owner or Scrum Master certification in order to work in those companies. Or whatever that looks like. Whatever you're finding out through your discovery and your validation, that should be informing which programs you're doing or which training you're doing or which reading you're doing or however you want to approach learning, however you want to approach filling in your skills gap. But do that intentionally, focused on what do I need to do here? What do I need to focus on in order to showcase that I am the, great fit for my great fit? And then we're going to launch. And you've actually kind of probably been doing this all along to some degree. Communicate the unique value of your offering. So talk about what is unique about you. There is something, I promise, if you're struggling with this at all, definitely reach out to me and I'd be happy to chat through it. But yeah, talk about what is unique about your background that would make you such a great hire for certain companies. Who are you for? What results do you create? This is, again, very similar to product positioning. If you've been, learning about product management, this is basically product marketing that we're doing. You want to be clear. Who are you for? What results do you create? Is your story short enough to repeat it later? So if you're networking with me, can I remember what you told me in a succinct way that I could repeat it later? If someone else said, hey, do you know anyone who fits profile X? I could be like, yeah, I talked last week to someone who fits profile X. You want to keep it short enough to repeat, and you want to keep it memorable enough that they want to tell someone later. And so you want to kind of have basically like a 1, 2, 3 about me. And whenever you're posting on LinkedIn, whenever you're showcasing your skills, you're practicing your work in public, you're talking about your portfolio items that you have kind of gone through and accomplished, you want to be bringing it back as much as possible to something short and memorable. So even if you do a post that's like, hey, this week at Cherry on Tech, we were doing A, B, and C, and I was learning X, Y, and Z, and blah, blah, blah. So many great things are happening. I'm super excited about the surface area. At the end, you want to find a way to summarize that back into your story about, why you would be a great hire for the right company. And ultimately, our goal here is that when we're networking, we tell that short, memorable story enough times that people think of us when they see an opportunity that aligns. And we want to make sure they think of us when they see an opportunity, as I said, that aligns. Which ones? If you have basically just said, I want to work in product, any product role will do, people probably won't think of you because that's too broad. So you need to be memorable and specific. So when they see certain opportunities, they think of you. And you want those to be the ones that also excite you. That's real you. And then you would keep evaluating. So continue to do informational interviews to reevaluate market needs. If this term informational interviews is new, definitely do a little bit of research. I highly recommend informational interviews. But yeah, continue to learn about what people are seeing going on in the market, what people are struggling within the product management domain, and compare that against your own profile, and then find ways to showcase the things that, again, you actually have strength in that maybe other product managers struggle with. Even if they've got maybe more product management experience than you, maybe you have more experience with one part of the job that some of them struggle with. So reevaluate what is going on and how you can talk about your own strengths. Get feedback from everyone who will get it, give it, whether those are peers who are also trying to, make the transition, or product managers or hiring managers or HR people when you apply, anyone who will give you feedback, of course, try to get feedback. And a part of that, ask for feedback every time you are rejected. If you are able to ask a bit more tailored questions, something along the lines of, if you've made it through an interview or two, and there's maybe a bit more of a relationship, saying, hey, is there, something that stood out as perhaps a weakness with my application or my profile that I could get training on to improve, rather than just saying any feedback, which is then big and broad, and you kind of put the work on their plate. And keep track of your results as you iterate or improve. So if you're starting to tell a story about yourself, if you're starting to showcase your work through posts, through some online portfolio, as you do networking conversations, as you interact with people, if you're starting to showcase your work and you're finding that people are responding well, great. Try something a little bit different and see if it continues to go well. If you feel like you're not getting kind of the engagement, or you're maybe not being as memorable as you want to be, work on that, iterate on that, try to improve that. So if you are, never making it through the resume screen, we want to focus on iterating on the resume. If we're making it through the resume screen, but we're always falling out at the first interview, well, we want to iterate on the first interview. So we want to figure out what's going on in that interview. What questions am I getting asked? How do I give more confident answers? How do I work on making sure there's less friction here? I don't get perceived as a risky hire here. And I actually get perceived, in fact, not just as qualified, but as having unique value that has been showcased or demonstrated. I mean, this is, I guess, more of the same, but yes, iterate. This is also the life of a product manager, is iterating on your product. So pivoting your positioning if you need to, add training if you feel like it's required, demonstrating your skills with further practice if you feel like you have examples missing from your demonstrated skills. So as you're starting to showcase your work, if you notice, nothing I've done before actually showcases how talented I am at data analysis. Well, is there practice you can do? Is there some project you can take on that would allow you to talk about your ability to do data analysis? Whatever that might be. If you feel like there's something that you haven't showcased yet or demonstrated yet, think through, okay, how can I practice this in public and showcase the results of my practice so that people see what I'm up to and what skills I have? And I would say when we talk about showcasing your work and also the ability to like figure out what work you could do to then showcase, it might very quickly feel like, oh, wow, there are just so many things that I could do. I could write blog posts, I could write LinkedIn posts, I could make little TikTok videos. There's so many different ways people do this these days. I would take that same skill set that you're trying to develop for product management work, vicious prioritization, to also look at this through that lens, right? So if you want to develop yourself and kind of showcase how you are a great fit as a product manager and ultimately get hired, you have limited time to invest in this endeavor. And doing training might be the best use of that limited time, but it might not be. Doing practice, things might be the best way to build confidence in your own skills so that when you show up in an interview, you feel really confident and therefore you showcase your value better. But if you actually have confidence already, you might not need to practice. You might just need to write about what you've done in the past. So think through, is it really training I need? Is it practice I need? Is it just demonstrating what I already know that's helpful? When we talk about showcasing your work, it's going to be, you want to think through this perspective of like, what can I showcase that I've already done? What can I showcase that I'm actively doing? And then perhaps what do I need to do in order to be able to showcase what's missing? But I would focus a lot of your energy on showcasing what you already know and what you're learning actively, because you're going to get more bang for buck there, in my opinion. There's probably already so much that you do know and already so much that you are learning, and you just need to make that public. You need to let people see, you need to let people in. But on rare occasion, you also notice, I really struggle every time I start to talk about this. I feel less confident. I feel weird about it. That probably comes through. Okay, great. In order to showcase strength there, we actually need to build strength there through training or other resources like this. Okay, so I know I just talked like a mile a minute about a lot of things, but I'm going to summarize into some bullet points here. You do need to qualify yourself, but you also very much want to build your unique value proposition. You're not just qualified, you are uniquely valuable. And in order to do that, I would focus on evaluating and iterating what your unique value proposition is, networking with intention, and telling that memorable story over and over and over again until you feel really, really confident in what you bring to the table. You feel like you're solidly kind of communicating your value. You're showcasing what you do know, what you're learning. You're showcasing all of those skills that you're bringing to the table from your past experience, through your work and through your practice. So I think, that is actually, I've talked really fast, so I made it through really, really fast here. But that is my presentation. I'm happy to go into questions or go further into any of these surface areas. You can also find me on the Cherry on Tech Slack. If you're there, you can find me on LinkedIn. I've included the link there, but it's just my first name and my last initial. And then here in YVR in Vancouver, I am sometimes in person at some product tech events or WIMD events. And those are also both great communities. If you do want to network and you're in the Vancouver area, ProductBC is across BC, of course, and for product managers of all levels, whether you're trying to break in or you're already doing it. And then WIMD is for women in male-dominated industries, but some of their events are also open to all genders, and just really friendly networking opportunities. So, yeah.
Thank you. I was hearing just like the ambulance. Do we live this close? I'm in Vancouver too. Thank you so much. I love it. I feel like, again, I know that we mentioned a lot about this as how to show your work as a product manager, but I feel like absolutely anyone, any career, any space can really use what you just show us. That was pretty cool. And I love, again, I feel like for a lot of product managers, this will be a little more familiar about the cycle that you were showing. But I think it's such an easy way to break down how to do it and why it's important. And love it. I feel like it's like, oh my goodness, I should have done this last week. Anyway, I know that you were talking a little bit about Cherry on Tech, and maybe some of you don't know, but Cherry on Tech is a volunteer-based organization where we empower underrepresented genders, so women, non-binary, and trans folks, to get into tech by the power of a tech squad. And we have something that is called the cohort program, where we have a program that is 15 weeks, and we have tech squads, and the tech squads work together into a project. And that's how we met amazing people like Jeanine, that are mentors, and guide them to just do it better. I want to talk a little more about the unique value. I feel like this is where people is struggling the most. I don't know if you can hear the crows. The crows are insane. Yesterday, like a parenthesis, yesterday we thought that they left us and they didn't like us anymore, but no, they're back here. I feel like they honestly, they go away on the weekends and they come back to work
They go on
Mondays. Yeah, definitely, because they're here, they're allowed. Because I feel like for a lot of people that are switching careers and coming again, this could be an example for any switching careers anywhere. But talking about that unique value, and how do we talk about what we bring into the table?
Yeah, and that's why I think like it's really important to kind of sit down and take that perspective to your own career. I can give some examples, but I think it is going to really depend on where you're coming from and what you understand is going on in the market. Some examples, I've worked with people recently who are wanting to break into product management. One is from healthcare. That was, I think, one of the examples I gave in the talk, which is I've actually had a few people who are like, I work in healthcare, but I want to work as a product manager. Some of the relevant skills from that environment, depending, I mean, healthcare is also a big space depending on what you're doing, but high risk jobs or high stress, jobs. Product managers, oftentimes you're juggling a lot and you're trying to, again, kind of viciously prioritize a lot of different opportunities. If you've worked in certain healthcare spaces, you might be familiar with, again, kind of this concept of triage in an even more extreme and literal sense, and this ability to receive a lot of information and pull out, these are the things that really need to be focused on. So that's one example, depending, again, what your background is. I've worked with people who worked in government and wanted to switch over to, a product management role. And government, you're often, even if you're not in a, PM role, you're often kind of dealing with a lot of different stakeholders, and stakeholder management is a big part of that world. And probably also like regulatory things. So you're probably also dealing with certain like fixed requirements as well as malleable requirements, and a lot of negotiating going on. That is a strength that you can take forward into a lot of product management roles, a lot of environments. If you're in a startup that's maybe, say, B2B, and they're in a stage where they don't have a really robust customer service team yet, and you're basically dealing with all of their maybe customer facing teams as stakeholders on a regular basis, and you're like, well, one client is half of our ARR, like we have to keep them happy. That's like fixed requirements, and then you have malleable requirements. So you can map your background, like just take that one step back to think not just, okay, I work as a again, maybe data analyst in government is like an example. That doesn't mean that you don't have product management skills. Think through, okay, what is true about the environment that I work in that might actually be uniquely valuable to certain other environments I want to work in as a product manager. So those are some examples, but it really will vary and depend. But yeah, take that step back and think about not just the role that you've had, but also the context that you've worked in, because there are going to be certain jobs where that context is actually like a gold mine, or people who will look at your profile and go, wow, okay, you know how to handle red tape, jumping through hoops, bureaucracy, you know, our customers are governments, like we want you, or whatever that is. Yeah.
Love it. Yes. And I mean, and I feel like maybe that's the hardest part for some people, that just coming outside and seeing like what you have done and you're good at it, because you are just so focused about finding the job postings, that sometimes I don't qualify for absolutely everything, so I shouldn't apply for this, I have never done it. But I feel like when you come out and start thinking a little more clearly and intentionally about what you have done, that will give you a lot of openness. And I love the part where you mentioned about talking to people and ask them. I mean, that's exactly what you do when you're building something new. You just go out and start asking people. And we forget so much about that when we are looking for a job. Yes, it's like, what do you have? Do you have that? I want it. But then you forget about asking people about you and how you can be part of that space. So how do we approach people and ask them about us? I feel like that's a hard one.
That's a good question. Yeah, if you're talking about questions of, you know, people in your network, especially if they're not necessarily like a friend, but more of an acquaintance, it's a little bit more arm's length distance. If you want to ask them some of these more challenging feeling questions, so for example, you want to ask them for a referral, or you want to ask them for direct feedback. Oftentimes I find what can be handy is to kind of think about what feels one step removed from myself, just getting that direct feedback or getting that direct ask. And so, for example, if you're asking for a referral, here's one of my favorites. Instead of saying like, hey, do you know Alice? And instead of saying, can you introduce me to Alice? Instead saying, hey, do you know Alice well enough that you feel comfortable introducing me? And so it's no longer about our relationship. It's no longer about, do you know me well enough? Do you feel like I'm qualified? Because that could be a bit hairy. It's about, do you know them well enough? And whether or not you do is not actually so relevant. It feels really easy for you to tell me, ooh, I don't actually know her well enough to do a referral right now. Okay. It doesn't feel like it's so hard. And in the same way, when you're talking about feedback, it's similar to when you're doing research on your product. If you're going to ask your customers like, hey, do you want a feature? Guess what? They will always say yes. And so you also have to figure out, how do I take one step back and make it feel less personal so that they can be more honest? If you say, do you like my design? You know that there's an expectation that you be nice and say yes. And so if you say, hey, do you think I present as qualified as a product manager? There's an expectation that you be nice and say yes. And you might be friendly enough and kind enough to realize that actually the kinder thing to do is to say, no, here's why. But a lot of people will fall into that trap of being nice. And so they'll just say yes. And so you want to find ways to say, hey, this is my profile today. What do you think a hiring manager at a fintech company might perceive as a weakness in my profile? This is especially great if that person is not actually in fintech, because it's like a little bit removed, where you're not saying, what do you think is bad? You're saying, what do you think they would perceive as a risk in hiring me? And when you add a little bit more softness to the language, I believe they're more likely to be honest, because it's easier. You're not saying, do you think I'm a risky hire? You're saying, if someone was to perceive a risk, what would it be? And it's easier to just say, oh, well, I think someone in fintech would look at your background and be like, I don't know if they're going to be careful enough to work in a financial environment. You're like, okay, great. I come across as maybe like a little bit shooting from the hip here. Maybe I want to be like presenting and showcasing the examples where I've been very thoughtful and methodical and I've slowed down and taken my time. And then you can showcase those things in your portfolio to kind of round out whatever gaps are being perceived.
I mean, this sounds so easy, but I feel like something that you mentioned is practice, practice, practice. I feel like you're just going to get at asking these questions and getting feedback by testing it out and going out and asking different ways for people to see. Is like, oh, maybe I don't want to answer this. You're maybe being too direct. Or people, like you were saying, most likely I will say, yeah, I want to be nice. And then, yeah, you're really good at this job. But in reality, we haven't had the chance to really talk more about it. So I feel like practice is going to be so powerful for this. And I feel like something else is, when you start asking these questions and getting so good at asking questions and getting feedback, is this something that you can use at work and say, hey, I'm so good at asking questions and getting feedback from people? So this is something that you can, again, use as a skill for yourself.
Well, as I said, it's exactly the same as asking for feedback on your product. Asking for feedback on your resume and asking for feedback on your product are actually very similar approaches. And so all of these skills that you develop, if you get more comfortable talking to strangers, that's a win, because you're going to have to talk to your customers as a product manager. If you get more comfortable figuring out how to ask questions that don't have a trap of this is what a nice person would say, that's a really useful skill as a product manager. You're learning something that is like integral to good product management. If you learn how to ask questions that don't have an obvious right answer, could not be more powerful. One of the best skills I think I've developed in my career. And so these skills that you're learning, sure, they feel hard and sure they like might be a bit frustrating as you're learning, but they are also the practice. They are also you getting better as a product manager, and they are also things that you could then later showcase potentially. If you want to get really meta here, you can talk about like, how do I reduce bias when doing research on my own, profile?
Love it. And I feel like, again, if someone comes to you in a networking event and they're asking these amazing questions to you as a product manager, is that they're looking for the next role, you are already thinking as a hiring manager, like, oh my goodness, look at the question they're doing, how they're doing, and how confident. I feel like this is a good way of showcasing what you do is by doing it. So when you put it in your resume and then you go back, let's say that we're having an interview, you already know that person is good at asking questions.
Yeah. I think the way thinking like a product manager is one of those skills that's like hard to put on a resume, but shows up when you show up, where it's like, yeah, you ask really clever questions. You prioritize the right opportunities. So you're prioritizing the right questions if you're asking questions, or you're reaching out to the right people. People can understand like the strategy behind what you're doing. And if you're posting, for example, they can see like what's the message you're trying to communicate. Because again, clear communication skills are also part of product management, being able to tell people, here's the value of what we've done. So all of this, ties back, which is what I love about this approach of thinking of your own resume, your own job search as if it's a product, because then every skill that you're working on is product skill.
I mean, and it's powerful. I feel like I've been telling to a lot of people, how powerful is the message that you are telling people? Do you believe in that message? Because a lot of people do not believe when they're saying what they're good at it. So it's like, if you don't believe that you're good, how the other person is going to receive it? And again, that this comes with practice, and you saying it many times to many people that you not start believing it just because, but it's coming to be truth. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Practice.
Yes, I don't see any questions here, but I feel like, how do you keep? I know something that you mentioned is Okay, so now that you told me that I talked to you and you told me that I'm missing X thing in my resume or as a part of my skills is like trying to build something to build that skill. I wanted to throw some cherry on tech here
Yeah.
because again, that's part of what we do in cherry on tech is like building teams together. So you get to build those skills. We are not doing a cohort for the fall 2024. We're going to have one next year. But outside of that,
Yeah.
because we give you the space, how can you work in something if you are by yourself? Like, how do you build that skill that is missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is way easier if you're working on like a squad or have something that you can iterate on. But a lot of the product management skills, you can also, if you want to do case studies or if you want to apply and actually practice, you can take, for example, an existing product and go, okay, if I were to build, what's a good example? I don't know. If I were to build, let's see, a video generation tool using AI, which is very cutting edge, right? Video generation using AI. If I wanted to build a tool that does that, but I wanted to build one for people who are really concerned about the environmental impact of AI. This is actually a case study that I've done. That's why I'm pulling it as an example. What could I do? What could I prioritize differently if that was my focus? Who would I want to talk to if that was my focus? And I was kind of using a lens more of just like wanting to look at the technical details and make them more climate friendly. But you could also say, okay, if I wanted to make this app that I love already, I'll use Spotify, even though I don't want to. They're a bit of an evil corp. But anyway, if I wanted to make a version of Spotify, but I wanted to make it for, I don't know, teens specifically. Like if you figure out, okay, there's an ideal customer profile that's maybe not actually the ideal customer profile of that product in market today, how can I maybe interview that ideal customer profile? Be like, have you ever used this product? What felt like it was missing? What felt like it wasn't working? And better questions than the one I just asked, but unbiased versions of that, right? Do your research process. Actually talk to a made up ideal customer profile. You can also go to a made up ideal customer profile without a product in mind. And so, if you have a certain group of people around you, maybe because that's the space you work in or because you're in school, you say, okay, what's a pain for a lot of students in university? Because I'm a student in university. I don't know, start doing a bunch of interviews, identify a pain, and then build a solution mentally. Maybe you can't physically build it. Maybe you don't have the design skills to design it, but you can build out what would be the minimum requirements to have something that people might want to use. You can go through a lot of that practice yourself. And I think the most important part, which again is like learning how to approach people, ask them thoughtful questions, and learn what's missing. What do they want that they don't have today? And the building part of product management is really important too. But I find early on, if you're thinking about switching into product management, oftentimes people over-index on, well, I know how to write user stories and make Jira tickets and work with the dev team to get it built. It's like, great, but do you know what needs to happen? Like what needs to get built? How do we figure that out? And usually you can do that without partners, but the building itself usually requires friends.
And what I love about this, again, is the part of, and I feel like a lot of people will come here. Maybe I can ask you this. It's like, oh, but then I don't have any data or any KPIs that I can show about this. Because this is what a lot of people will say about projects that are not like real. Like, how do I showcase then that I'm good at this? Because no one used it. And like, what will be your idea here?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, even when you get a job in product, what you find out is it's really hard to measure your own success, even when you're in the job. Oftentimes, there's so many different variables. It's like, oh, we have a really good sales quarter. Is that because I made a new feature that's selling really well? Or is that because our sales team is on fire? Or is that because the market changed and suddenly people want to buy this product in this space? It's hard to pin down your success as a PM. And I would say the people who are really like metric oriented, this is going to be a challenging job for you anyway. But that said, I think more than anything, if we're talking about showcasing your work and showcasing your skills, a hiring manager will be able to look at your process and know that your process is sound. And you might be able to talk about, oh, if I saw certain signals, I would pivot. If I saw other signals, I would double down my investment. And they can see that your process is sound, and whatever the data would be, you would be following a sound process to make decisions. You can even explicitly say, I am going to pretend I launched this and I saw these results. What I would do with that for these reasons would be make these decisions. So you can even pretend, like you can mock the data in a sense and kind of, again, show your math, even if you can't have the math, even if you can't solve for X, show how that equation would look for you. And that is what is needing to be showcased anyway. The actual data is less relevant, but the how you use it is more relevant.
Love it. Because at the end of the day, are you believing in the process that you're doing? Are you believing the skills that you have? Even if you have the data and you can show whatever, if you don't believe that that was important and relevant and that you learned something and that you can pivot and there were roadblocks and you move around, is irrelevant at the end of the day. So I love that is that unique value part that is so powerful for absolutely everything that you mentioned today. And I feel like this just tied in so well with the two or like all the guest speakers that I've been having so far. We started with Clea talking about his strengths and your uniqueness, your unique story bringing to the table, then his storytelling with Christina. Yesterday, again, I was telling Aisha, I know that this is for developers, but the way that you're explaining how to show your work is so powerful. The same for today is just such a great compliment. And again, we have Anna on Saturday. We're going to talk about how UX designers show their work. So just keep coming, all of you invited for this because it's just getting so good. I'm loving it. Jeanine, thank you so much. This was so good.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Great chat. Thank you.
I will put Jeanine information here so you can follow her in LinkedIn. I love that. I forgot to mention, like, the sharing part piece is really powerful at the end of the day. Just keep telling people what you're doing, how you've been doing it, and what you've been learning. Is a good one and easy to add in your portfolio or like showcasing your work. So love it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. This was so good. See you on Saturday.